technical giant. I don't know how in the hell I did that.
All right, so I will go ahead and get verbal confirmation. Doug Carter?
Yes, Rusty, good to be with you.
Thank you. So we do have a quorum and we do have 3 people present on the board. So that is what is a minimum requirement. So we're good to go, sir.
Great. All right. Well, thank you all for being here virtually and in person. Let's go ahead and, if we can, move to the review and approval of the August 27th, 2024 meeting minutes from the previous Secured School Safety Board meeting. Does anybody have any questions or comments on those minutes? If not, I would entertain a motion to move forward with approval.
So moved.
Motion to approve.
Okay, sounds like we have a motion in the room and Superintendent Carter. So would one of you be willing to second that?
I'll second if you.
Okay. All right, Rusty, let's do a roll call vote. We've got a motion to approve the minutes. And a second.
Jonathan Whittam,
Yes.
Eric Bullen,
Yes.
Doug Carter,
Yes.
Jordan Hoffman,
Yes.
Devin McDonald.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Great. Thank you all. All right, Rusty, I'll kick it over to you to introduce the advance request from the Common School Fund from, looks like Warren County. Is that right?
Correct. We did get the request as a common school fund. I did send the information. Basically, they are looking to, for $125,000, it would be for metal detectors is what they want to use it for. Part of their reason is because their operation fund will have to cover some of their SRO expense due to the fact that they got 81% of their secured school safety grant funding as opposed to the 100%. So they were a little short there that they needed to cover. So now they're asking for this advance from the Common School Fund to cover the cost of these 6 metal detectors that they want to have installed. They have gotten grant funds before. They've done everything. They've sent in information that is necessary. And for those, for like Jordan, I'm not sure, this may be your first one of the Common School Fund. Basically, for everybody's reminder, what we are doing as a board, what you are doing as a board is approving that we recommend approval. Then if that's what you do, then I will send a memo over to the State Board of Education, and it is then up to the State Board of Education to actually make the final approval of this request. And then they deal with the school on what the terms of that agreement is, and that this is a loan. If you recall, this is not like a grant. This is a loan. But the State Board of Education sets all the logistics and all that. This board just does some of that background to make sure they qualify and that it is something that is eligible. So as I went through and looked at it, unless anyone has any questions, I would recommend to the board that they recommend to approve the request from the Common School Fund.
Great. Thank you for that, Rusty. Thanks for the background and the reminders. We don't do these every meeting, but we do have them every so often. So are there any questions about this particular request or the details from anybody on the board? Okay. If not, I would entertain a motion to recommend approval be sent to the State Board of Education. And Rusty, I know you were going to try to identify who that's going to be now that Brian Murphy has left that group, but we would have a motion to recommend approval that we would send over there, and then they'll take final action.
So second.
Sounds like we have a motion in the room there. Do we have a second?
Second, yes.
Okay. All right. We got a motion and a second to recommend approval. Rusty, let's do a roll call vote, please.
Jonathan Whittam,
Yes.
Eric Bolin,
Yes.
Doug Carter,
Yes.
Jordan Hoffman,
Yes.
Devin McDonald.
Yes.
Thanks.
Great. Okay, thank you all. Let's move on to the school safety report. And if there's anybody in the room who can give a quick kind of intro to where this came from, the legislation, and kind of what the deadlines are and where we're at with it, then we can open it up for questions and comments on the report itself. Is there anybody in the room who can introduce the topic for us?
So this was a mandate, was it 1492? Was that include 14 and the House Bill 1492 a couple of years ago that we would have to do. So this is the second time we would have to do this, is for the governor's report and the legislative council relative to an overview of school safety. And then it'll spell out the SRO information that was going to be necessary, what data had to be included in that. And then also included in the report had to be the Secure School Safety Grant funding matter. So that is in a nutshell, basically what this report is. And this report is due November 1st of each year.
And just to add to that, there's also a requirement that schools, regardless if, and this is Alyssa Schroeder, IHS Legislative Director, there's also a statutory requirement that every school, regardless if they receive a secure school safety grant or not, has to report to IDHS information about school resource offices, if they employ them, if so, how many, are they SROs, are they law enforcement officers, a few other delineated facts. So this report also contains all of that reporting for this year. Again, this is the second year we've collected that data.
Great.
So as you go through the report, just to give some highlight, there were out of what was the heaviest inclusion this year was this was the first year that we had where the, excuse me, where the county safe school commissions had to send in a report to IEDHS by September 1st. And so we went through those reports that were submitted. It had meeting minutes and agendas and items like such as that they had to report. So we went through those and we had 86 of the 92 counties that reported that. And we extracted some data, and you'll see on the second page, the current programs. Those programs that were for improvements, that were things that I saw in multiple schools that had reported that they were using these items. And then you'll see that there's like 5 different areas, specific things that a specific county may have done that I thought were unique and the staff thought were unique enough to include. And then there were also 5 challenges that were identified on a more than one time. So there was multiple counties that reported the vaping, the communication limitations, the stop bus arm violations, truancy issues, and Narcan availability as challenges that they were still facing relative to school safety. So that was one of the big things. Last year's report was very heavy on 1492 and all the changes that were made through that legislation. So this year, the additional things came out of those county school safety commissions that reported. And then on the SRO data, the aggregate data from the SROs, we included last year's numbers and this year's numbers so you can see a difference. Just keeping in mind that there was not 100% of reporting from that perspective. So last year we had 300, and this is required by school corporations and charter schools. Excuse me, private schools are not required to report this data. We know there probably are some private schools that have SROs or law enforcement officers they're using, but they're not required to report. So they're not included in this data. Last year we had 345 either school corporations or charter schools report. This year we had 373, so we did have an increase in the number of school corporations or charter schools that reported. I will tell you, and Steve Balco was not able to be here, but he gave us the list so that we could create a drop-down box for the school corporations or charter schools. And there, in that list, there were 454. So out of those 454, we did have 373 reported, which from a survey standpoint, that's not bad. So that's where those numbers come from. That compared to this year, compared from last year to this year. As you can see, we broke it down by the SRO data and then the law enforcement officer data, so that it's kind of separated from those two categories as we go through. And then on the very last couple pages is the chart, because the grant, we're supposed to report from its inception of the grant all the way to current. So we have from the 2014 all the way through, and then we included this year's numbers from the 2025 across the different areas of funding and reported those numbers. So those have been updated from last year as well.
Jonathan, I've got a couple of questions. On page 1 of the document where it talks about second paragraph down under secured school safety grant funding. I would suggest a bit of a language tweak down on the third line where it says last year 474 schools split an allocation of 29.8 million. I would venture to say Representative Bartels is going to be asking us about that because it appears we had that over and above the 25 million. So it might read a little better as a suggestion that the 25 million plus the 4.8 million, which had been deobligated from previous grant cycles, for a total of 29.8. Again, just a matter of clarification, easy to explain, but it might read a little better if we didn't start off with the 30 million. The other question, of the 6 counties that have not yet established a school safety commission, who are they, and what's the follow-up with them, and are any of them receiving any of these funds?
Superintendent, they do have a commission. All 92 did report that they have a commission. Those 6 just did not report this information to us relative to their meeting minutes, agenda, or whatever the case is. But they do, we verified through staff that they do have a commission. They just failed to report for this report.
So you're convinced, you're sure that all 92 counties have an active commission?
Yeah, the only county that is a little odd, and I think we mentioned this last meeting, is Stark County, because they kind of include their school safety stuff with their LEPC meetings. So we have worked with them and talked to them about in the future that they need to kind of separate that meeting from school safety and the LEPC meeting instead of combining it. They need to separate it so that it'd be more officially a commission meeting as opposed to a combined meeting. But otherwise, Nikki Lee from our staff contacted all of the counties and got contact information. So based off of what they told us, yes, sir, they all have an active commission.
Okay. What about the multidisciplinary threat assessment teams that are required to be established by I think July 1 of 2025 under IC 1021? Do you know how many there currently are? And are those per school corporation? Or are they per county?
This is a requirement that would go into the school safety plan, and correct me if I'm wrong, Melissa, I don't think this is actually reported to us, is it?
I would have to double check.
I think this might be a DOE. Yeah, I think this is a DOE requirement, Superintendent, and I just included that as so people would know that from a school safety perspective, that they are going to be required to have that team by July 1 of 2025, but I don't have data on how many are already done and or in what stage they're in.
Okay. Just a recommendation. I mean, obviously I'm not going to be here, but there's a recommendation that the onus on this goes back to the school to protect themselves, not necessarily for the state to do anything with it. The establishment of that team is pretty clear by statute. And the final thing that I'll say is, I don't know if Representative Bartels wants to talk about this at all, but I think there needs to be at least some discussion about whether it's reduced or the same funding in the next biennial budget. But at least right now, it appears that it's going to be pretty tight in the upcoming session. So I think it's worthy of a conversation right now. We talked about this 12 years ago when all this started on the heels of Sandy Hook, that there's going to come a point in time where schools are going to have to be self-sufficient and not continue to rely on $20 or $30 million a year. So maybe Representative Bartels might be able to address that.
Oh, I got lots of questions. Yeah, I don't want to interrupt the meeting, so I mean, you want me to do this at the end or is as we're going? I don't.
I would be happy to let you jump in as you have comments and questions, Representative. I think it's all relative to the report, and great point, Superintendent Carter. I think this is something that we've discussed during our business review with the governor's office, is what does this funding look like moving forward? What does the request look like? How do we sort of prep schools in a way that's not immediate elimination of certain funding, but how can we sort of offload some of this to their budget cycles, and what does that look like? And I think that's the big question. So Representative Bartels, I'll let you share your thoughts. You may know more than we do.
Let me just ask this question. I'm hearing, some people are reporting, some are not reporting. What do we do with this report? What is it? What's its intent? Do we analyze it? Do we do anything with it? Is it just a requirement that we at the General Assembly thought was a hell of a great idea? And I mean, what is the outcome of this report? Are we changing anything?
I can answer some of that. This is Alyssa again. So particularly for the SRO reporting requirement, for several years, there had been lots of questions, particularly from State House members, of how many SROs out there, how many schools are employing them. So the SRO data collection, in my opinion, was solely to get a better grasp on what's the universe of the number of SROs or law enforcement officers in schools, because we, IDHS or DOE, were not able to give an answer to that, since schools didn't have to report it to that. And, it'd be very difficult to ask each, one school district may look different than another, or different areas of the state. So as for the SRO, I think the reporting information, the intent of that was say how many SROs or law enforcement officers in schools actually are there.
Okay. Let's go back to probably more your venue. So when we issue these, either recommending the common school fund withdrawal or a school safety grant, is the money based and given after they purchase equipment or purchase these things, or is it given and then they go purchase?
This is a reimbursement type grant where they are given the award letter saying this is how much you've been awarded for your project, whatever your project was. And then they have to submit after the fact that, like, if they bought a camera system, they have to submit showing that they spent the money on that camera system. So it's after the fact. That's kind of a compliance check for the grant.
So as Rusty was saying, for our grant, the Secured School Safety Grant is reimbursement only. You can't use our money for things you've already purchased retroactively. And then for the advance from the Common School Fund, I believe that's more like a loan, correct?
It is.
And that funding is completely separate from the Secured School Safety Grant. That's a different funding managed by the State Board of Education, I think.
Yeah.
However, by statute, this body reviews those applications, make a recommendation, and then the state board makes the ultimate authority, and they control the money that is or is not given in the advance.
And was it just an oversight that private schools are not reporting or not required to report? Was it something we as the General Assembly said no, or was an oversight, or does anybody, maybe nobody really knows?
Reporting on the SROs, is that what you're talking about, Representative?
Yes.
Yeah. I think over the course of this entire grant program and this board, private schools have largely been excluded from opportunities to receive funding until recently, reporting requirements. And so it was just a few years ago that they were added in as an eligible entity to request grant funds. So I think slowly they've been added to the eligibility, and probably slowly they've been added to some of the reporting requirements. But yeah, I don't know that this was an oversight. It probably was somewhat intentional. But I think if you're going to be receiving funding for an SRO, then maybe it's a good opportunity to tell us what you're using it for, how many people and give us some of that data if you're receiving tax dollars to support that program.
Go ahead. I got some other things, but I'm trying to, go ahead.
Are there, Superintendent Carter, you had some good points, I think. Did you have any other questions or comments on the report itself? Or, if you're looking, anybody else in the room or online that you want to bring up at this point?
No, I've hit my bullets, I think.
23 will be changed to 24, correct?
Correct. Devin was asking about, on the cover page, I accidentally included the 2023. I will be sending this to PIO once it's approved and making any changes like the one that Superintendent Carter recommended. And if there's any other recommendations for the change in the report, and then PIO will make those adjustments. And one of those notes is already identified as changing that cover to 2024.
Yeah, I think that was a good modification or proposed modification. I don't think unless anybody disagrees in the room, I'd like to change that verbiage to show the appropriation plus the de-obligated funding. I think that's a good way to separate those out. Superintendent, thank you. Any other comments?
Jonathan, or Rusty, have we balanced now? Do we have any additional de-obligated funds other than what could be coming out of the 2024 cycle? Or do you think we're in a pretty good place of balance now?
I think anybody in the room, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're pretty much balanced now. I think the schools have gotten to be a lot better the last few years at prioritizing their projects and spending all their money. So I don't think we are seeing nearly as much coming back to us at the end of the grant cycle. Is that correct? Everybody in the room there?
Yes, they have gotten a lot better about their budgets. It looks like we are balanced right now, and by the time we finish closing out the fiscal year 24 grant, I think we're going to have about 1.6 million in de-obligations. That's a rough estimate because not everyone has finished their cycle yet, but it looks like it'll be about that.
Okay, great.
And the one other thing, sir, that I'd like to mention is that next year, in order to kind of make this even a more robust report, and I would like to include the Department of Education, Steve Balco and Ryan Stewart, in helping us to draft up the kind of the overview part, the numbers, the SRO numbers and the grant numbers. That's something that's in our lane, obviously, and we have those, but I would like to work with them closer and starting in next year's report for them with the School Safety Specialist Academy and other things that they deal with, and get their input relative to input into this particular report to make it a more robust report on school safety.
Yeah, I'll jump back in here. I think the report is great with the data that we've received, right? And we knew and we've known for a long time that schools don't like to report any data up to the state for any reason. And it's hard for us to get things like this that we need or that are required. And so, getting 373 out of 454 and 86 out of 92 counties, I think those are good numbers. But we've always known that we're never going to have sort of foolproof, complete, clean data on some of this stuff. So it's hard for us when we get those questions about, well, how many SROs are in school buildings, or what percentage of our school buildings have an SRO in them at all times, and we can't give that answer, or the Department of Education can't give that answer and say we're pretty confident. That's really tough, especially when we are the entity giving out a significant amount of money each year for SROs. And I think this year it was about 20 million. Is that right? 20 million out of the 24 went toward SROs.
This year it was just under 17 million.
Under
Just
17. A very high percentage of the funding available is going toward that particular program. So it makes sense for us to want to know where those dollars are going, how useful are they? Is that a program, those become operational needs for a school. And, you're hiring people and it's not, when the program started at a much lower amount of funding each biennium, it was for locks, cameras, hardening of buildings, things to protect the different entrances and doors. And it has transitioned largely to an operational cost for these schools with their SRO programs. So I think Representative Bartels, you hit on it, Superintendent Carter, you hit on it. The path forward from here is and needs to be probably different than what we've been doing the last few years. And we should start thinking about what the strategy looks like, what that communication looks like for schools to be able to prep so that it's not your funding's cut off and now you've got to let your SRO go. But how can we help schools budget for this properly and transition this grant program to local education dollars instead of a state?
But Jonathan, I'm going to throw Devin McDonald under the bus here a little bit. Devin's in the room, I believe, but Devin made it very clear a long time ago, particularly with CGI and the complexity of CGI, that we can't fund these programs in perpetuity. And I think I completely agree with him, and he's wicked smart, and I completely agree with his position. But I also see us on a collision course with the state representatives and the Indiana General Assembly. So I think I agree with you 100%, Jonathan. They need to start preparing for that budget responsibility, but it shouldn't be our responsibility to do it for them. There's going to be so much competing for dollars now. And gosh, first time that, and we've said this all along, the first time we reduce anything and something happens, it's going to be our fault. So anyway, I appreciate you thinking that way, Jonathan, and I do think the communication is the right thing to do and to lay that groundwork. It's a lot of money every 2 years, and it's going to be, again, very competitive in the upcoming session. That's all I have. I'm sorry I'm taking more time.
But there's no real consequence from them not doing what we ask, right? Even if they don't report or they don't participate, they can still request funding and receive it, correct?
Well, they can request it, but they won't score nearly as high as if they have completed it. The staff does a really good job by holding them accountable to that. I don't know how they get it all done, but they do.
So is it safe to say that out of the people that are not reporting, these corporations, they're not receiving funding? Is that safe to say that, or you cannot say that?
I'll throw that back to staff.
It comes back to personal responsibility, I guess. There's no consequence for their actions, so.
Yeah. It does talk about them being required to report, but the only, so to speak, hammer in that is they do have to be in a county that has an active state school commission to be able to get secure school safety grant funding. And we identify through our staff identified that they do have that. So they do meet that requirement. The SRO reporting requirement, not sure what the consequence is, to be honest.
Statute right now doesn't have a consequence for not reporting the SRO's data, and the requirement to report that data is separate from the grant. It's not, if you get grant for an SRO, you have to report us this data. It's regardless of the grant. Any school that has an SRO has to report to us, but if they don't, no, there's no specific consequence in statute.
Do you guys have a rulemaking authority?
It would be the board would
Oh,
have.
that's what I'm saying, yeah. Or
Change authority. I'll have to double check.
So it's not addressed. So I'm assuming we've not created any administrative rule to say you could lose funding or not be eligible for. So, okay, just something to think about.
Yeah, I think, and maybe Justin or anybody else in the room, I feel like this board probably has enough flexibility and authority to prioritize projects and counties that have indeed reported some of this data. I don't think we've done that in the past. I think we've generally said if you meet the statutory requirements, then you'll be eligible. But I don't know that we couldn't say as a board from a policy perspective, we're going to at least prioritize the counties that have, or the schools that have given us the SRO data. And maybe, maybe that's a starting point. I know with this last round of funding, we did have to, we had to change things up. We didn't have enough funding for all the projects and all the proposals. So I think we funded at about 81% for schools that had previously received funding and 100% for schools that had never received funding. This was their first time. But maybe those percentages are changed a little bit based on whether you've done everything that statute has asked you, and given us the data that helps us make some of those decisions. Is that something that you think we could do from a policy standpoint moving forward?
I mean, if you're asking, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I can get an answer back to the board right after this meeting. I'll circulate it, dig into the statute just to verify.
Yeah.
So I would be interested to see what our statutory authority is to do that kind of stuff.
And if we need to do something in the General Assembly, I think this is where we could say, like, Superintendent Carter's, money's going to get tight, so there's going to be more consequences, and the consequence is going to be less money or no money. Yeah. Anyways, it might help facilitate the transition of a windfall of money to a lot less. Windfall is probably a strong word.
Appropriate though. Everybody knows what ARPA is, right?
I throw something out. From a school perspective, having been here with a few of you from the very get-go of this thing, I remember Devin's comments way back. And I think one thing that's very interesting, Director Witham pointed out, the shift was, it used to be 75% hardening and equipment to 25% SROs back when we first started. And we saw a slow, gradual transformation to where now it's like probably higher than 75-25 in the other direction, which is what the intent was, but schools had to harden their buildings first, which made total sense. But looking at the numbers, the overview of funds used, SROs and LEOs, if you look down there in the second line, 228 in 2023 to 273 in 2024, using safety grant money and additional funding. Speaking of, as a district ourselves, we're in the middle in size. We use a SRO money for it, but we have 6 different officers that we're employing during the course of the year. So that has been taken very, very seriously, finding other resources, other avenues to fund officers and buildings. And I think that's a very important thing to point out. Schools have been doing that. The districts I talk with in our study councils, they're doing the same thing. They have additional, I got hit with the 81% at the last meeting. Hey, what in the world happened? Hey, everybody's needing it. It's tight resources. Hey, it's part of it, right? We're all vying for the same pot of pie or the same piece of pie. However, I know that what they're doing is trying to put officers in buildings as much as they possibly can. I think it's been an important shift. And I think it's going to be even more important going forward. Having come from a district that has shooting, I know how important it is. And I'm not speaking hyperbole whenever I say that, how important it is to have a deterrent if at all possible. So I know it's going to get tighter and tighter, but I do know that the schools are using other funds to be able to meet those needs. This helps, absolutely. It helped us as a district as well, but we're employing them regardless. That's where most districts are at this point. I'd like to know how many would have answered that question if we had that out there. I think that's important information. I'd also like to see what's the data from 2024 back to 2013, whenever we first started with SROs. How much has this grown and morphed into a bigger endeavor by school districts and deals with local law enforcement, because there's a lot of them that you have those MOUs with them. How much has that shifted and changed, and how much has that burden been shifted to schools as well? Because these are all our kids, whether they're in Allen County or Morgan County. So that's how we have to look at it as a board. So I just wanted to throw that part out.
Yeah, great point. And I think anecdotally, we know that it has been a significant shift from, I mean, I think this grant started at about 3.5 million a year back in 2014. And yeah, mostly hardening projects to 24 million, 25 million, and mostly SROs. So it has served an incredible purpose, in my opinion, because it has allowed schools to do the one-off projects, and it has allowed, maybe they did those in the beginning years, and now they've been able to, many schools have been able to establish SRO programs. They've been able to put these officers through the SRO training. They've been able to hire one and then two and then maybe three. And so these programs have, in my opinion, they've stood up because of this grant program. And now we need to figure out how to take it to phase 2 or phase 3, where those programs are able to continue, but maybe not in the same form that they are right now. Do we have any other questions or comments on the report itself?
To follow up on the question that was asked, I think this body does have the discretion to deny funding to those applicants if they haven't reported.
Yeah.
So there is some
Okay.
sort of stick that can be applied.
And that's been tough. That's been a tough position for the board to take in the past, because we don't want to be denying funding to schools. But if we are having to prioritize more competitively than ever the funding and who's receiving funding, and we have some schools that are doing everything right, and we have some that are kind of just cruising by because they think they're going to receive funding regardless, then, let's make it a point to say, you're going to be at 100% if you're doing everything right. And the folks that are going to start being limited, or where we're going to have to start making tough decisions and reducing that percentage, are the schools that are maybe giving us half of the items that we request. Okay, I am, let's see, Rusty, what do we need to do for this report? Do we need to take a vote to move it forward with
We
those
need to vote
changes?
Need to vote to take it forward with the suggested changes. Yes.
Okay. Well, at this point, I would entertain a motion to move the report forward for sort of final modifications based on some of the comments today, unless we have any other comments or suggestions before we do that.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, we have a motion in the room. Do we have a second?
Second motion.
All right, motion and a second for approval of the report to move forward. Any other discussion before we take a roll call vote? Okay, Rusty, let's take a vote.
Jonathan Whittem,
Yes.
Eric Bolus,
Yes.
Doug Carter,
Aye.
Jordan Hoffman,
Yes.
Devin McDonald.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Great. I think this was a really good teaser of some discussion that the board is going to have to continue. We will know a lot more, I think, in the coming weeks and months as to what the next administration's priorities are, what the budget's going to look like, if school safety funding is gonna go down or stay the same or go up. So it's just something that we should all be thinking about and preparing for if it goes one direction or the other. So I think this was very timely, and I appreciate the comments and Superintendent Carter bringing it up and Representative Bartels, you being on here to help us kind of think through the legislative perspective, because there are going to be some tough decisions that are going to be made over the next biennium. So, does anybody have any final thoughts, closing comments before we entertain a motion to adjourn? Yeah, yes, sir. I see a hand.
I kind of alluded to this, but I want to probably be a little more direct on when we take these reports, at some point, potentially this board may have to do some analysis, which would include some kind of a recommendation. So just start thinking about, people sitting at the table and people, what kind of data do we want to regurgitate from those reports that are important? So just start thinking about those kind of things.
Yeah, that's a great point. We do a really nice job of collecting data and putting it into reports all across the state. But yeah, what's the next step? If it's showing a trend or showing something we don't like, let's be in a position to create some recommendations on how to fix it. So thank you for that. All right. Any other closing thoughts? All right. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any opposed? I didn't think so. All right. We'll close this one out. Thank you all very much. Hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
Be safe.
This is water, by the way.
Bottles.